David Fincher's back with his brand new movie Mank, along with an exclusivity deal with Netflix. If you've been loving his output there, like the binge-worthy House of Cards and Mindhunter, this is obviously a win as the mega streaming platform is letting him tell the stories he wants to tell with little to no interference. So what's the first story that David Fincher decides to tell with this total creative freedom? Oh, obviously, it's the tantalizing story of how they wrote and made Citizen Kane?
How they wrote Citizen Kane, that Rosebud movie, that movie's overrated.
Anyway, since the 1990s when Jack Fincher, David Fincher's father, first wrote the script for Mank, David Fincher has been steadily trying to get this movie off the ground, but he insisted on filming the movie in black and white to best represent the 1930s and early 1940s. Basically, he wanted to make it look and sound as old as it possibly could have. So to most studio heads, this sounded like a recipe for a box office bomb. So back to the vault Mank went, and since the 90s, we've received many Fincher movies that some would consider modern-day classics, like Fight Club, Zodiac, and The Social Network, just to name a few. Along the way, he built a reputation for himself as one of the best modern directors in Hollywood. In a sense, it wasn't really a gamble for Netflix to let David Fincher make this movie. He made a name for himself, and like your Quentin Tarantino's and Christopher Nolan's, he's one of the few modern-day directors whose films that people would flock to see regardless of the subject. But, Tarantino's movies all have his signature dialogue and violent pulp, while Nolan's movies are usually quite cerebral with a healthy dose of action and adrenaline. Mank, on the other hand, is unlike anything David Fincher has done before, and it sort of lacks a lot of the crossover and mainstream appeal that most Tarantino and Nolan movies have. So, does Mank bite off more than it can chew? Does this movie test the loyalties of audiences? Why should we care about the making of Citizen Kane? Well, strap in, I'm going to give you my case as to why Mank is worth the time. As I said before, Mank is about how the classic film Citizen Kane was written and made. Citizen Kane, for those of you who don't know, is a 1941 film directed by Orson Welles that many consider to be the greatest movie of all time. It's about a newspaper tycoon with seemingly a wealth of control and influence throughout his professional life, but when he utters the last word Rosebud before dying, an investigation is led to find out what exactly that word means. The character of Kane is a composite character of a few different media tycoons, one of them being William Randolph Hearst, more on him later. Citizen Kane's non-linear storyline and daring cinematography were innovative for the 1940s, and frankly, may have gone over most critics' heads as the film won only one Academy Award, but after a critical reevaluation years later, most people now know of Citizen Kane and its legacy, and its influence on cinema as a whole will endure forever. But along with this critical reevaluation, there was also a lengthy discourse of who actually deserves credit for writing Citizen Kane. Enter Pauline Kael, who wrote in 1971 a damning essay about Citizen Kane. In short, it talks about how Herman J. Mankiewicz really was the one who wrote Citizen Kane, not Orson Welles, who was credited as a co-writer with Herman Mankiewicz. You still with me? Enter David Fincher and Jack Fincher, and together, the father-son duo brought to life a sort of redemption arc or last laugh, so to speak, for Mank himself, the alcoholic, cantankerous, but talented screenwriter who really was the sole writer of Citizen Kane, or at least that's how it's presented in Mank. So just like Citizen Kane, Mank jumps around back and forth in the narrative's timeline, and as an homage to screenwriting itself, these transitions are written out on screen like scene headings in a screenplay. I loved that little touch. From the get-go, we learned that Mank is tasked with writing a brand new script in 60 days that would then be given to Orson Welles for him to direct, produce, and star in. Mank, at this point, is an ill and injured man, bedridden with not much else to do but drink alcohol and write. Sounds juicy, right? As the excitement of the development of the script moves forward, we jump back in time to several flashbacks of Hollywood in the 1930s. We meet characters like William Randolph Hearst and Louis B. Mayer, two real-life media tycoons who both shaped mass media, for better or worse, to what it is today. As Mank rubs shoulders with these men and tries to gain their influence for his personal career, he quickly realizes the morally ambiguous swamp that these two men trudge through on a daily basis. What ends up being a major plot point for this movie, and really what ends up inspiring the characters in Citizen Kane, is the race for governor in California in 1934 between Republican Frank Merriam and Democrat Upton Sinclair. Upton Sinclair, who's on the Democratic ticket, was touted and smeared as the socialist and communist candidate from the start. Sinclair actually just wanted to end poverty in California. making a catchy movement called the Epic Movement, End Poverty in California. What ensues is the media tycoons Hearst and Mayer playing God in a way, using their tools, resources, and influence to effectively create fake news. Fake news. That's familiar. It's eerie how close this real-life storyline follows what's going on in the 21st century, specifically in recent times. You know, we've just recently passed a controversial and nail-biting election season marred by the quote-unquote fake news, if you will. It's all quite ironic, and the fact that this movie was written in the 1990s but just came out now in 2020 is poetry in motion, really. Is art imitating life, or life imitating art in this case? Speaking for myself, this helps the movie feel a little less unstuck in time. This storyline gives the movie some real-time zest, and perhaps hit harder than it otherwise would have if it were released in the 90s. So while any director could have tackled this movie and probably tell it in a competent way, what makes this movie all the more memorable is the lengths at which David Fincher's crew went to make this film look and feel like it was from the 1940s. Above all else, Mank is a love letter to old Hollywood. The first tracking shot we get of all the sound stages and background actors and studio personnel walking around the studio backlot was bliss. Some of these shots do in fact feel plucked out of an old Hollywood film, so massive props to the entire Mank team for this amazing attention to detail. Honestly, I will not be surprised at all if this film gets the most Oscar nominations this year and pretty much sweep all of the technical ones like production design, sound design, cinematography, you name it. I don't really see any movie on the horizon this award season that would rival this movie in sheer technical scale. I love the little random film splotches on screen. That was a fun little Easter egg since this movie was shot digitally. There are all these little cracklings in the sound. The sound sometimes felt intentionally worsened, or sometimes you could hear the sounds of a projector playing the reel of the film. It really did look and sound old to an extent, but I found it all to be quite charming. Even the music felt ripped from the period, and this was courtesy of Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross coming back at us with another stellar score, but this was certainly quite an unidentifiable score for them, since there was no electronic music, no techno beats, no synths. The only instruments used were actual instruments and sounds used in the 1930s and 40s. So on to the acting real quick. Gary Oldman as Mank was expectedly brilliant. He always dips into whatever role he sinks his teeth into, and while a lot of people know he's a great actor, I feel like people tend to forget Gary Oldman in conversations regarding best actors working today. Thinking about him doing the dinner scene over 100 times because of David Fincher's perfectionistic style is exhausting, but it pays off. It's a stellar scene. What a professional. I was also delightfully charmed by Amanda Seyfried in her role as Marion Davies. You know, I was quite impressed, and I think this is definitely her best performance that I've personally seen of her so far. You know, I barely talked about her character so far. Actually, I didn't talk about her character at all yet, but Seyfried's role as Davies adds another emotional component to the script. I look at her character, who's usually draped in a white outfit, as someone who is pure at heart but complicit to the morally ambiguous actions happening around her. Amanda Seyfried really turns it up a notch, plays and leans into her femme fatale sort of role, and she was just spectacular in this movie. Probably will get a Best Supporting Actress nomination, along with Gary Oldman also getting a Best Lead Actor nomination too. And then you have someone like Charles Dance, who plays William Randolph Hearst. He really commands the screen every time he graces it. You know, he was Tywin Lannister in Game of Thrones, and he uses the same magnanimous presence to be the media tycoon Hearst. Really, from top to bottom, I thought all of the actors were great in this movie. Props to the entire ensemble. So I talked and blabbered on a lot. What does that mean for you? Well, if you already have a disposition to watching older Hollywood films, then I think this movie is right up your alley. This movie is quite educational in a way, and I found that to be quite engrossing. You know, this is coming from a guy who's reading a book about the Best Picture nominees of 1968 for fun. I liked Mank, definitely. It's a super well-made movie, clearly a passion project, but personally I almost feel like it was more interesting to me intellectually rather than in terms of actual enjoyment. Coincidentally enough, this is much in the same way I felt when I watched Citizen Kane for the first time. Mank would honestly probably benefit from a rewatch where I could focus less on what's happening and more on, okay, now I know what's happening, how does this change how I feel emotionally toward this character or that character? But when you kind of consume it all as a whole, and when you think about how this all came together, and the attention to detail, and the accuracy of it all, it's hard not to be impressed in at least some small capacity about Mank. So with that, I really think you should approach the movie with an open mind. and probably you, at the very least, might take something educational away from the movie, if nothing else. Mank. I don't know what else to say. Hope you like it. Hope you like this video, I should say. Hope you like Mank too.